Please consider supporting us by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Your support will be greatly appreciated.
The transatlantic slave trade was a dark chapter in human history. It represents one of the most inhumane and brutal periods where millions of Africans were forcibly taken from their homeland. It involved the transportation of millions of Africans across the Atlantic Ocean. These individuals were captured, sold, and transported under the most horrific conditions imaginable. These forced journeys, known as the Middle Passage, were horrific. Enslaved Africans were packed tightly into ships with little room to move or breathe. Many did not survive the journey due to disease, malnutrition, and abuse. They took place over hundreds of years, from the 16th to the 19th centuries. This prolonged period saw the systematic exploitation and dehumanization of African people. European powers, including Britain, played a major role. They established and maintained the trade routes, built ships specifically for transporting enslaved people, and profited immensely from this trade. This trade followed a triangular route connecting Europe, Africa, and the Americas in a cycle of commerce and human suffering. First, manufactured goods from Europe, such as guns, textiles, and alcohol, were shipped to Africa. These goods were used to trade for enslaved Africans. These goods were exchanged for enslaved Africans. African leaders and traders were often complicit in this exchange, trading their own people for European goods. Second, the enslaved Africans were shipped to the Americas. This leg of the journey was the infamous Middle Passage, where the conditions were so dire that many did not survive. There, they were forced to work on plantations. These plantations were the backbone of the colonial economy, producing vast quantities of goods. These plantations produced goods like sugar, cotton, and tobacco. These crops were labor-intensive and required a large workforce, which was provided by the enslaved Africans. Third, these raw materials were shipped back to Europe for profit. The goods produced by the enslaved labor were sold in European markets, generating immense wealth for the traders and nations involved. This system, known as the triangular trade, enriched European nations, including Britain, immensely. The wealth generated from this trade helped to fuel the Industrial Revolution and the economic growth of Europe, but it came at an unimaginable human cost. Slavery wasn't just morally abhorrent, it was an economic engine. It fueled the growth of the British Empire. The profits from the slave trade and the exploitation of enslaved Africans on plantations were vast. This wealth flowed back to Britain. This wealth wasn't just confined to a select few. It permeated British society, it financed industries, it created jobs, and it spurred consumer spending. This economic activity, built on the backs of enslaved Africans, contributed significantly to Britain's rise as a global power. One of the most significant beneficiaries of slavery was the British textile industry. Raw cotton, produced by enslaved Africans on American plantations, flooded British factories. This led to a boom in textile production. British factories churned out massive amounts of cotton cloth. These textiles were sold domestically and exported globally. The profits from this trade were enormous, turning Britain into the world's leading textile manufacturer. This success, however, came at a heavy human cost, fueled by the forced labor of enslaved Africans. Another major industry that thrived on slavery was the sugar industry. Sugar, produced on plantations in the Caribbean, became a staple in Britain. The demand for sugar was insatiable. This demand led to the establishment of vast sugar plantations worked entirely by enslaved Africans. The sugar trade generated immense wealth for British plantation owners and merchants. This wealth, however, was built on the brutal exploitation and suffering of enslaved Africans. Financing an empire's slavery and British capitalism, the profits generated from slavery didn't just benefit individuals and specific industries, they played a crucial role in financing the British Empire. The wealth poured into banking, shipping and insurance. These industries flourished, fueled by the slave trade and colonial exploitation. This economic activity provided the capital for Britain to expand its empire, build its navy, and assert its dominance on the world stage. Legacy of this period is complex, marked by both economic achievement and the brutal reality of slavery. Port cities and prosperity: Liverpool and Bristol. The impact of the slave trade was most visible in British port cities like Liverpool and Bristol. These cities served as major hubs for ships involved in the triangular trade. Thousands of ships carrying enslaved Africans, sugar, cotton and other goods passed through these ports. This activity fueled rapid economic growth. These cities became wealthy, with merchants and traders amassing fortunes. This prosperity, however, was built on a foundation of exploitation and human suffering. Beyond the obvious, other industries impacted by slavery. The legacy of slavery is often discussed in terms of its direct impact on agriculture, particularly in the production of cash crops like sugar, cotton and tobacco. However, the tentacles of this inhumane practice reached far beyond the plantations. The influence of slavery extended beyond the most obvious industries. It infiltrated various sectors of the British economy, creating a ripple effect that touched numerous aspects of daily life and commerce. It reached into various sectors of the British economy. The economic benefits reaped from slavery were not confined to the colonies. They were deeply embedded in the British mainland as well. Shipbuilding thrived, constructing vessels for the triangular trade. These ships were essential for transporting enslaved Africans across the Atlantic, as well as for carrying goods between Europe, Africa and the Americas. The metal industry produced chains and shackles for enslaved Africans. Blacksmiths and metalworkers found a steady demand for their products, which were used to control and transport enslaved individuals. Banking and insurance industries grew, managing the financial complexities of the slave trade. Banks provided loans to plantation owners and traders, while insurance companies offered policies to protect against the loss of ships and human cargo. Even seemingly unrelated industries like pottery and textiles benefited indirectly. Pottery workshops produced goods that were traded for slaves, while textile mills manufactured cloth that was used both in the trade and on plantations. They supplied goods for trade in Africa and the Americas. The demand for these goods created jobs and wealth in Britain, further entrenching the economic dependence on slavery. This demonstrates the pervasive reach of slavery in shaping the British economy. The profits from slavery helped to finance the Industrial Revolution, leading to advancements in technology and industry that would shape the modern world. The legacy of slavery is a stark reminder of how deeply intertwined human suffering and economic progress can be. The human cost and moral implications of economic prosperity. While there's no denying the economic benefits Britain reaped from slavery, it's crucial to acknowledge the human cost. Millions of Africans were forcibly uprooted from their homes, subjected to unimaginable cruelty. They endured the horrors of the Middle Passage, the brutal journey across the Atlantic. Those who survived were forced to work in inhumane conditions on plantations. This system generated vast wealth for Britain, but left a legacy of pain, suffering and injustice. In abolition and its aftermath, the shift in British economy, the abolition of the slave trade in 1807 and slavery itself in 1833 marked a turning point in British history. These legislative acts were not just moral victories, but also catalysts for profound economic transformation. Britain, once a leading slave trading nation, began to distance itself from this horrific practice. The country had built much of its wealth on the backs of enslaved people, and the abolition forced a re-evaluation of economic priorities. This shift had a significant impact on the British economy. The ports that once thrived on the slave trade had to find new sources of income. The economic landscape was changing, and industries had to adapt quickly to survive. Industries reliant on slavery had to adapt. Plantations that once depended on enslaved labor had to find new ways to operate. This led to innovations in agricultural practices and a gradual shift towards more mechanized forms of production. The British economy underwent a period of adjustment, with a greater focus on industrial production and trade with other parts of the world. The Industrial Revolution was gaining momentum, and Britain began to leverage its technological advancements to maintain its economic dominance. This transition, though challenging, signaled a move towards a more ethical and sustainable economic model. The abolition of slavery was a moral imperative, but it also paved the way for a more diversified and resilient economy. British industries began to explore new markets and develop products that did not rely on the exploitation of human beings. Trade with India, China, and other parts of the world became increasingly important. The textile industry in particular saw significant growth as Britain exported its goods globally. This period of economic transformation was marked by both challenges and opportunities. Social reforms accompanied these economic changes. The abolition of slavery was part of a broader movement towards social justice and workers' rights. The British society was evolving, and these changes were reflected in its economic policies and practices. The shift in the British economy was not just about moving away from slavery, it was about embracing a new era of innovation and ethical practices. This period laid the foundation for modern Britain's economic landscape, characterized by technological advancements and a commitment to social justice. Section 10. The unpaid debt legacies of slavery in modern Britain. The legacies of slavery are still felt in modern Britain. The wealth generated from slavery helped shape British society. It is visible in the grand buildings and institutions of the time. However, this wealth was built on exploitation. This legacy continues to fuel debate about reparations and racial inequality. The economic disparities between different ethnic groups in Britain today are, in part, a result of the historical injustices of slavery. 17th Reparations and reconciliation, addressing the past, shaping the future. The debate surrounding reparations for slavery is complex and multifaceted. It raises questions about responsibility, justice, and the lasting impacts of historical injustices. Some argue that Britain has a moral obligation to pay reparations for its role in the slave trade. Others believe that addressing present-day inequalities should take precedence. Regardless of one's stance, the conversation about reparations highlights the need to acknowledge the lasting legacy of slavery and its impact on contemporary society. Understanding the complex legacy of transatlantic slavery. The transatlantic slave trade was a horrific period. It is impossible to understand British economic history without acknowledging its role in slavery. The wealth generated from this trade helped shape Britain, from its industries to its cities. However, this wealth came at an unimaginable human cost. The legacy of slavery is complex and enduring. It serves as a reminder of the need to address historical injustices, promote equality, and work towards a more just and equitable future.
Please consider supporting us by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Your support will be greatly appreciated.